Michael Saylor strikes again. Do you know that he's got to pay roughly $1 billion a year in dividends? And yesterday or this morning, he disclosed that he sold some Bitcoin. And if you want to know why Bitcoin is down and what the overall impact of this is going to be today and long term, stick around. We'll go over the Bitcoin chart. We'll go over the STRC chart. We'll go over the strategy stock chart. And we will discuss two different points of view on this. This is the market update. I am your host, Bill Noble. If you need a roadmap in crypto, subscribe to this channel. Turn on alerts so you know when we're going live. And if the content works for you, please hit the like button. If you can hear me on YouTube, please drop a 1 in the comments. Now, Michael Saylor, what exactly is happening? Michael Saylor has roughly $1.7 billion a year in interest. You're like, interest? Why does Michael Saylor have interest? Well, he has interest because he used a special instrument called a preferred stock. A preferred stock is not a stock like a regular stock like NVIDIA. And it's not a bond. It's not a corporate bond. You can set the terms and set the interest that you pay people. You can have 0%. You can have 10%. Well, Mike promised people 11% per year at a big splashy speech at Bitcoin Vegas. The thinking being that Mike was going to siphon out all the money from fiat, pay people 11%, and put that money in Bitcoin. Sounds great, right? Right out of the Bitcoin standard. And part of the sales process was, if you don't want the insane volatility of Bitcoin, you should invest in STRC, where you get your 11% and Bitcoin goes up, and that's how you participate. So all the retail investors who didn't want volatility got volatility. So STRC went from 100 to 70, and then it came all the way back to 88. Okay. So everyone who didn't want volatility got volatility. And STRC is handling today's news fairly well because STRC holders are guaranteed their next dividend or interest payment. Now, with that said, Michael Saylor has said two things lately. The first thing he said was, we'll sell 1.5 billion in Bitcoin if we have to. And that was actually good enough to create the bounce in STRC and eliminate the overhang on Bitcoin from the story. Because at Wall Street, everything is about the story. I mean, we'll discuss the story versus common sense, but they actually did a great job of eliminating the story by saying, we'll sell Bitcoin if we have to. You know, they had some money on hand. They had about, let me get the exact number. They owe $1.5 billion a year, and they had roughly $2 billion on hand. So they had enough to kick the can down the road for a year, roughly, which is not great. Now, my argument was sell, I don't know, $3 or $4 billion in Bitcoin. Say we have 2 to 3 years of runway. We're not going to hose our lenders. We're not going to hose the people who bought our securities. And you'll never hear from us again, because by the time, we have to even think about this again, Bitcoin's going to be at 250K. It's going to be much higher in 2 years. Don't tell me the US government is funding a $2 trillion a year deficit. Don't tell me anybody's going to save the yen without some measure of printing, no matter what gets said. But that's not what happened. So they did this really cute thing where they said, we'll sell if we have to, up to 1.5 billion. Fine. But then the story went away until this morning. When they came out and said, last week we sold 3,000 Bitcoin for, a couple of $1 million. Let me get the exact number. For $216 million to cover the dividend for 1 month. So, okay, let's say you had an asset. Let's say you had bills to pay. You're just going to sell enough to cover the bills for that particular month. Okay. That's what you would do. And Mike thinks that, that's what he's going to do. He's just going to do this 1 month at a time, because why would I sit around with a bunch of dollars that don't do anything? Okay. In some ways, that's sensible, but Wall Street is not sensible. Wall Street wants an end to uncertainty. Wall Street wants the elimination of the story, because stocks, bonds, Wall Street don't operate on reality. They operate on stories. Like, for example, in tech stocks and in the Magnificent Seven, they've already discovered that there's accounting shenanigans where every dollar that they earn counts twice in these large, complex organizations where you have, like SpaceX, you have, Starlink, SpaceX, XAI, and Twitter, and everybody's doing business with everybody else, and it makes the accounting and the earnings look great, but they're all fake. Well, that's what's going on in stonks, and that doesn't matter until it does. But the story is what keeps people's eye off that particular ball. Couple guys look into NVIDIA, couple guys look into this and that. Nobody cares. Most of it is moving up and to the right. Some of it is crashing, but the overall narrative is not impacting Nasdaq. It's not. Now, with Bitcoin, we would have thought that when Saylor ended the narrative, he wouldn't rekindle the narrative by doing this 1 month at a time thing. Because when you do the 1 month at a time thing, you create overhang over the market. You essentially give the bears the story back that this guy is going to sell 3,000 Bitcoin on the regular. We don't know when, but all we know is that 3,000 Bitcoin or more could get dumped on our heads at any moment. He's doing it 1 month at a time, but from Wall Street's point of view, is this 3,000 Bitcoin it, or is it going to be 3,000 Bitcoin next week? Not to mention the fact that he puked it all at 60. So the average price is 75, and he puked 1 month's Bitcoin at 60. Now, you realize that if you're puking Bitcoin at 60, you may believe it's going even lower, which is why my argument about the 4 billion or the 3 billion in Bitcoin made so much sense. In other words, if you're going to sell the low, take the tax loss, sell it at 60 to an investment bank who will take the Bitcoin and then run Bitcoin and all your securities higher, knowing that you're done. Now, Mike sells the low at 60, and Wall Street is looking at this going, So is this guy going to be sitting on the market with 3,000 Bitcoin every time it goes up? Does this guy think it's going below 60? Is he not listening to his treasury people? Is he not listening to anybody? Now, again, back to common sense. You don't want to put money in fiat if you don't have to. So from Mike's point of view, peeling enough off just to like add 1 month cushion makes sense to him. But what Mike hasn't figured out is that's not what Wall Street wants to hear. And in many ways, like what Wall Street wants to hear and the story behind it matters more than what makes sense, right? Wall Street doesn't care what makes sense. Wall Street wants to know what the story is. Okay. So now we can start going to TA. And as somebody just noted, you know, if you look at the 4-hour chart, Bitcoin, so this was the 200 period moving average on the 4-hour chart, right? And Bitcoin went up there and got rejected. It was something somewhat similar to the 21-day moving average, where Bitcoin actually took it out along with ETH and along with a bunch of other cryptos. It made a return move last night, 2 return moves. Made it look awesome. I'm like, all right, here we go. Based on the fact that the jobs numbers are terrible. And some kind of Fed pivot to dovish or neutral is imminent. Like, you know, here's Germany, here's, you know, Porsche cutting 4,000 jobs. I mean, you know, every time someone cuts jobs, it's by the thousands. It's by the thousands. And I can't possibly understand why Michael Saylor, you know, would say, okay, dividends are due in dollars. Okay. New preferreds just got expensive, meaning selling Bitcoin protects credit. So it does protect STRC, and he locks in a loss. Now, the direct impact is supposedly modest. $216 million a week, you know, is a rounding error compared to to Bitcoin's volume. So, you know, if you want to get unhysterical, selling that amount of Bitcoin is not going to impact Bitcoin if he has to do it once a month. Okay. But when the largest crypto holder has flipped from a structural buyer since 2020 to a programmatic seller, even 32 Bitcoin last month rocked the market and comes with immediate ETF outflows. More selling ahead, or can he be done? Right? If he's done, Bitcoin can recover back above 75. If he sells it from time to time, it's 55 to 70 at best case. And of course, if he continues to sell, you're going to get this bear market crowd and Benjamin Cohen going, yeah, we told you, right? We told you so. And I mean, I even put a scenario together that if this guy doesn't stop, here's what can happen. And in some ways, I regretted doing that because I couldn't believe that this guy could be that stupid, because he actually eliminated the story by not having to do very much at all. He just says, we'll do 1.5 billion if we have to. And I assumed he was smart enough that if he had to do 1.5 billion, he would do it all at once. He would just be like, boom, I'm done. I was like, okay. But now we're doing it $200 million at a time, and we're handing them a story. We're handing them a story. And when you hand them a story, you give the bears an advantage. Now, let's talk about something maybe constructive, maybe, in that in reality, you can say that even though the moving average rejection was terrible, when they get done smashing these things, the fact that Saylor isn't crushing the market with an amount of Bitcoin that would affect it really, given the daily volume, you can look at this as a 38% retracement of the recent move up, which is at 61.7. And I guess if that doesn't hold, you're looking at heading into this Lux Algo support zone at 60.3. Okay. That's about the best case scenario. In other words, it's a simple retracement based on a simple sale. But I would prefer he eliminated the story. In other words, what this is it feels like another version of I sold 32 Bitcoin. This amount of Bitcoin is not huge, but it's psychological. So let's hope we don't have to deal with that. But as you may know, hope is not a tactic. And this was, this has the potential to kind of break some daily charts. Ironically, the daily chart that it's not breaking, okay, is Solana. Now, Solana is at resistance, which, that's a little scary. But Solana is holding so far because this gray area is equilibrium. So it's not terrible, but it could be if Bitcoin falls apart. Now, ironically, ETH is the one thing that's holding up from a technical analysis point of view because it's still above the 21-day moving average. Okay. Thought that was going to be okay. Zcash is also holding its 21-day moving average at 422. One day after I gave up and said, all right, well, maybe this is not going to 200 and maybe this is a diamond that can create a huge breakout. But the psychological impact of this doesn't help altcoins, obviously, right? In other words, crypto was about to enter a more positive environment to the point where, which is funny, I don't know if it's an accident or everybody's just looking at everybody else's stuff looking for a topic. After the payroll number, I did a thumbnail that said Fed pivot or a title that said Fed pivot about the jobs numbers. And then I saw Ivan on Tech this morning on European time put on his thumbnail, Fed pivot. So I don't know if that's an accident or we're all using the same stuff to come up with titles, whatever. But clearly the job market was terrible. And clearly this was going to benefit gold, silver, and Bitcoin to the point where I could thumb my nose at the sellers and be like, okay, guys, well, you know what? Good luck with these job numbers. All right. And they're already out this morning. They're already out. This is coming in from the Eagle King. So over a 2-week period, the average price you received on your Bitcoin sales was $60K. How did you manage to get such bad execution? When you buy the highs. When you sell the lows. Whoever is handling your order flow is likely making a killing. Yeah. Because the guy who's taking the Bitcoin from Saylor doesn't know if he's got more behind it. I mean, if I was a market maker, right, and I get this, my sales desk comes to me and goes, Saylor wants to sell 3,000 Bitcoin for about $200 million. And they know what his bills are. They know he has to come up with, $1.5 billion a year. And this guy is probably looking at him, is looking at the salesperson going, well, how much is behind this? Is he got more to go behind it? And the salesperson goes, he didn't say. So the guy, the Bitcoin trader is like, okay, well, yeah, I'll take your 32 Bitcoin, but Bitcoin's at 62 or 61. I'll take it at 60. Because I don't know if you're going to pound my face in. I want to make sure I can get out of these 3,000 Bitcoin on a holiday. This is your holiday July 4th surprise, by the way, in case you're wondering, right? This is unbelievable. It is absolutely unbelievable. And of course, all the tweets are out, right? Like, he's like, liquidate a body part if you have to, but keep the Bitcoin. Then the new excuse is, well, my corporation may have to sell Bitcoin. That was directed at your personal Bitcoin holdings. And you're just like, Mike, seriously, for the sake of us all, eliminate the story. For example, I did, and we can count them if we want. I did, I don't know. Let's count them up. So I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Michael Saylor thumbnails, videos, and got pretty good views. The Saylor bull trap is still moving. And then everyone else on YouTube continued the Saylor narrative. They just, because that's all anybody wanted to watch was, disaster stuff. And then I was like, all right, enough of this. Let's go the other way. And it worked for a week. It worked over the holiday. They squeezed everybody out up to 63. They even printed 64. I'm like, the Fed is going to have to acknowledge the risks in the job market. Boom. Saylor returns, and the bears have a big, big laugh. Because even if it's a normal retracement, now everyone is wondering. And I ran with this Saylor narrative to the point where I can tell you for sure that I think I actually kind of ticked off loyal subscribers. People were like, okay, Bill, enough disaster, 9 months or 7 months or 8 months into the bear market. I was like, okay, enough. So STRC is doing okay, but everybody else is like, wait, what do you mean? And of course, to add insult to injury, Nasdaq is up 1.5%. So Nasdaq's up because they make it impossible to be short, because Nasdaq is not going down on the 250th anniversary of America. Nasdaq is not going down when the World Cup is in town. So the plunge protection team is on that. And we all have to, right, face the fact that Vitalik has also seemingly piling on, by saying Ethereum prepares for complete overhaul and biggest upgrade since the merge. Now, that's a great headline, and I like that, and that may be why ETH is doing better. However, Vitalik does clarify at some point that that's going to take years to implement. But the fact that they're seemingly getting their head out of their you-know-what is good for ETH. And I have seen news from the Eagle King that Solana volume, thanks to security tokens, is ramping up. It's just that we have to deal with these mic interruptions where, we want to do this like 1 month at a time, hoping Bitcoin recovers, but they're not taking into account the reflexivity loop of, okay, yeah, Bitcoin will go up if the story is over, and the story is not over. It's not. Now, it is funny that, right now, MicroStrategy stock is only down 1%. But Bitcoin is getting monkey hammered 2.7%. It feels like, and we'll look at the daily chart in a second. It feels like bears are trying to turn this into something more negative than it really is. Because, I called up Toby and I said, is the sky falling here? Because, the last couple times, I mean, if you look at this from if you don't look at this as the 200-day moving average, the 21-day moving average, there's actually a Fibonacci circle point here from something I drew way back. Every time Bitcoin goes to get above the Fib circle point, it runs into the 21-day moving average. This time looked different. Wrong screen. This time looked different. And guess what? It's now back below the circle point. Okay. And then in contrast to Saylor, Tom Lee turns around. Where does he get all this money from? Tom Lee turns around and buys $73 million worth of ETH. This is after Metaplanet bought more Bitcoin last week. And who knows? Saylor could have sold the Bitcoin to Metaplanet. Is that the end of the world? No, probably not. But knowing the way Wall Street works, Alexa, alarm off. Knowing how Wall Street works, he restarts the story. So now I have to do not again thumbnail. Now everybody has to do, oh my God, he sold. Do you see how this has got like a rolling psychological effect? Because everybody's got to cover it. Everyone's got to talk about it. Everyone's got to press him on Twitter. See, markets, like I said, it is less about reality and more about the story and psychology, right? Or one person said about Nasdaq, Nasdaq is about confidence. Confidence in this AI narrative, confidence in the fact that the amount of money that they're going to spend on data centers is so huge that, AI can only get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because the amount that they're going to spend is just so enormous. It creates a psychological effect. You just look at what they call the CapEx numbers for these giant tech companies, and your mind is just blown. You're just like, oh my God, they're just spending and spending and spending and spending, and it just won't stop. And this fuels the narrative, even though in reality, everyone's going to spend all this money. Everyone's going to borrow and spend, and not all that money is going to get paid back based on every historical example, but nobody cares. Like Nasdaq has the opposite effect, right? They can do no wrong. They have Uncle Sugar underneath them. They have, this unstoppable retail bid. It's impossible for hedge funds to get short Nasdaq. They dump their stock and they get short and it goes up in their face or doesn't move or just sits there. Equally exasperating. Meanwhile, in Bitcoin, again, I can hear Benjamin Cohen. I can hear all these guys now. Shorts are programmed to take every 10% rally in altcoins, take, every rally and sell it. Just sell every rally. Okay. And again, we hand these guys the story. We hand them a story. And that doesn't make any sense at all. Now, let's go to more charts. Now, again, the only real good news is that, certain altcoins were up so much that a 2% retracement is not the end of the world. Like, for example, it's ironic. Anything connected to this ETH trade, like Chainlink, is retesting its 21-day moving average. That's the green wavy line, again, just sort of arbitrarily picking stuff, that doesn't feel like the end of the world to me. Now, that said, there is a flip side to this. There is. So Wall Street hates the narrative. They hate the overhang. They hate the uncertainty. But if cooler heads prevail and people say, well, you know, it's a fraction of Bitcoin's daily volume. If he's got to sell, you know, $1 billion like he's authorized to, what's the harm in doing 3,000 at a time? Investment banks take it from them and run it up 10%. It's exactly what they would do. That's exactly what any market maker would do. They would take the Bitcoin at a favorable price to them in case it goes down. And then if it didn't go down in a thin holiday market, they would run it up. I mean, you know, they would take the 3,000 Bitcoin from Mike and then buy 6,000 Bitcoin and hope to unload it all before he came out with the announcement. Classic. It's classic. So if that gymnastics is done, then the story can be done. If we don't want to talk about it tomorrow, or if there's a new topic to discuss, you know, again, you would have done this before, and I guess they did. They did it and did it before the payroll number, instead of doing it way before the payroll number and then letting that number come out and letting this idea that the stinky labor market will eventually help Bitcoin. That's not how they did it. But I think if you're bullish, you have to assume that it's not going to last beyond today. It's not going to last beyond today. Okay, let's see who's here. Right, SJ is talking about watch Aave. Let's put it up. Where's Aave? Again, we were looking at, you know, we were looking at Syrup. We were looking at Pendle. You know, we published a bunch of research in Patreon, and we have more. We're doing a Gann roadmap. You know, we're going to try a roadmap again for the rest of the year, and I kind of liked it because it was radical. Okay, so thank you for pointing out something good, because I was looking for something good. You know, here's your open mouth formations that we've seen everywhere throughout crypto. And Aave is headed for the top end of it, and the premium zone is not until 130. So, you know, DeFi alive and well. DeFi alive and well. You know, somebody said, you know, Esmeralda says, you know, he's talking about data manipulation. And that's true. That's true. I mean, the payroll number has been revised down like 14 out of the last 15 months or some crazy statistic like that. And if they want rates down, then they have an incentive to publish a payroll number that is no good. That payroll number may have actually been truthful. Okay. So they're trying to get this hawkish stink off Warsh, because all he said was he didn't like inflation. That's it. What central bank chairman would? The VARC driver says clearly the 4-year cycle is intact. Right? October to January will most likely be the low. Be patient. Has nothing to do with strategy. Just DCA over the next 6 months. We are below the 200-week moving average, or the 200-week simple moving average, and it's an easy game. Now, our Gann scenario that we will be discussing at the YouTube member area, you know, does reflect that you can have fall volatility. And I've been saying you're going to have fall volatility for a long time. But what kind of fall volatility? Are you going to have 30, 40, 60? You know, what kind of rally can happen in the meantime? That's the big question. Now, again, a little bit of whiny pants for me. I thought that this could be off to the races because, you know, they had the shorts on the run. They did. ETH was breaking out. Solana was glued to resistance and not backing off. You had that pennant in Zcash, which was a huge rally going someplace to happen. Zcash is all over CoinDesk this morning with paid promotion about how they're quantum ready. And, you know, you can love or hate Zcash for various reasons, but, you know, some kind of idea about private Bitcoin is better than no private Bitcoin or no ideas about, you know, any type of privacy. Any type of privacy, right? I mean, Monero is also down 3%. And again, the flip side is you can look at this, and I know Toby would say this, as a shopping opportunity. You know, why would you put more money in dollars than you have to? End of story. Wall Street is stupid. Bitcoin is about getting away from Wall Street. I'm like, Toby, thank you. I love you, man. Because I'm all not happy. I'm all not happy about this at all. And, you know, the idea of a Fed print job is not as dumb as you think it is. Why? Well, look at this headline, which no one is paying attention to, but that's okay. That allows us to pay attention to it. Bankruptcies in Japan surged to an all-time high as a result of the fact that their currency is collapsing. Their currency is collapsing. And when your currency collapses, you have, you know, you basically have a hyperinflation scenario. Your exports do better, but obviously things start breaking. And what is the only way that's going to stop? Okay, well, there's two scenarios. It's very simple. It's binary. Either you let Japan actually blow up, you know, you let their government debt crash to, to just catastrophic levels because interest rates spiral out of control because nobody wants to own their bonds. Okay. No one wants to own their bonds. So you have a disaster. And how do you stop the yen from falling? How do you stop the yen from falling? The Fed has to print dollars, has to give the Bank of Japan what's called a swap line. They have to open a pipe to the Bank of Japan to allow them to buy the yen and sell dollars. And where are they going to get all that money from? From our printing press. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. Okay. SJ747 is giving me some good TA tips. I would love to look at it. So he says, look at ETH BTC on a 12-hour chart, which I love. You know, it's like half a day. Okay. Look at ETH BTC on a 12-hour chart. Love this. So this is a crypto lifer, Richard Barry type thing where they look at, moving averages. So this red moving average is the 200 period moving average. It's the average of the last 212-hour closes. Okay, that's cool. And, it's at resistance. So I don't know if this means, Ethereum is going to turn around and collapse versus Bitcoin. Bitcoin couldn't hold a similar moving average. Okay. Good. So it remains to be seen, but every time any of these cryptocurrencies get to resistance, some stupid story comes up. And then retail loses interest because they're too busy chasing, and the Eagle King is bringing this up. The Eagle King, everybody is too busy chasing Micron or semiconductor stocks because like Bitcoin was going to break out on the upside. Micron was going to break down on the downside. And then Micron comes back up 3% and wants to attack the 21-day moving average, encouraging retail to just go on and on and on and on. Right? In other words, the psychological impact of Saylor really has nothing to do with the actual physical Bitcoin market. It has to do with psychology, right? So, if ETH can break out versus Bitcoin, oh my God. Now, that's something constructive. So, I would like to say, thank you to SJ747 for the TA tips. I always appreciate TA tips and what other people like to look at. Okay. Moon Sector 7 is happy to catch the stream live for a change. Yes, we vary our times. A consistent time is best, but we usually wind up having to vary it around things like my job. And one day we'll have a sponsor for the channel where that won't be necessary. And we can be like super duper YouTube channels. That's just not today, but that's all right because we're still on the air and we're still hammering away just like you are in crypto. We're digging in the dirt of the bear market, right? And I wish the bear market would prove itself as nothing more than a correction. Like that's the dream of all dreams. To have these guys who are like, it's the 4-year cycle and the bottom isn't until November or whatever. But right now, there's no arguing with those guys, right? And our Gann roadmap had something similar. We just had different prices and a different range than everybody else. That will be featured tomorrow on the YouTube member area where we will have new altcoins to focus on. We will have the Gann roadmap, and Toby will be grading my roadmap. She will grade the prices on a month-to-month basis. So school will be in session. I know better now than to just go off, kind of like, half what, and start publishing stuff without running it by our friendly neighborhood clairvoyant. So I'm going to be giving her levels, per month. She doesn't really do the whole timing thing, but I'm going to be giving her numbers. She actually had a really good call on buying Bitcoin last time. And a lot of the altcoins that we liked had double-digit week. So it wasn't terrible until, Uncle Mike put a turd in our holiday punch bowl with this stupid psychological whammy. It's like, dude, get it out of the way. Do what you have to do. Don't do this in piecemeal. Now, again, a counter argument I just thought of. If he does this 1 month at a time, he may start boring the market. In other words, if he starts to develop a pattern, the pattern eliminates the story in a way. I think that's what he's thinking. He's like, okay, on the first week of every month, I'll do 3,000 Bitcoin and I'll just keep replenishing my reserve. And eventually this won't be a big story. This will just be first week of every month. We just add a month to our cushion. Okay. And that makes me not too bearish if that's what it sounds like. And he's going to counter and say, why would I put billions in fiat rather than try to hold on to it in Bitcoin? My answer is because it would end the story. But, Mike's not stupid. He's a CEO for a reason. I just hope he's listening to his Treasury people. And his Treasury people aren't telling him what he wants to hear. Now, I have heard about Mike that, say something negative about Bitcoin in his presence and you're looking for a new job. I can't remember where I saw that from, but I will research it. Don't go into Mike's office with a chart and say, Mike, watch out, Bitcoin's going lower. Not a good idea politically. Bull Runner is first on the stream. Of course he is. The Jeski, a member right after that. John 316, bless you, sir. Peter Smart in the house. GF. Short BTC is still the trade. Hopefully we all get to flip long in the next few months. Tubby Tuber says Bitcoin is going to zero. It's been fun. You know what? Yeah, you got to admire the candor. I mean, that doesn't allow for a good 1 hour TV show. This is the market update. Bitcoin is going to zero. It's been fun. We'll see you next time. Ricky Ricardo Film says, in Bitcoin we trust. Okay. Tubby Tuber says, Saylor can do this for 2 years before the whole thing implodes. Okay. Grandpa Keeter. Okay. When will Toby make another guest appearance on the market update? It's been a long time. Dude, listen. You don't know. Okay, let me explain. So Toby, who is, I don't know, the anchor of the YouTube member area. In other words, I kind of run the stream with Eagle King and I do some PowerPoint, but you know, a lot of what people pay for is my translation of what she says with her abilities as both an analyst and as somebody who's got, you know, kind of 180 IQ radar, if you will, to put it scientifically. And no matter, but you know what comes along with these abilities is a certain shyness. And I have tried to get her to come on and be Girl Bill. That's what we called it. She did it once, Grandpa Keeter. That's what he's talking about. And everything blew up. She got in front of this thing. She wore these like red shades to protect themselves from these ridiculous lights. And it was Girl Bill. Okay, so maybe we can bring her on the market update. Frequently what we do is we do free shows because no matter what I say or what I offer her, she will not, it's just a shy thing. Does not want to sit here and do Girl Bill. I was even sitting over here kind of like, you know, doing Eagle King on stage, helping her with it. I don't know, man. The woman just makes herself scarce. You got to do the YouTube member area. However, I will relay the feedback. Again, we do occasional free shows. So maybe it's time for a free show so y'all can watch me cry about Michael Saylor as she tells me to shut up and stop crying, which is also a crux of the YouTube show where we do what's called Disaster Corn. We call it a different thing behind the paywall where we discuss everything that's going wrong and Toby provides a counter. I actually think people tune in for it. You know, we have lots of other stuff. All right. But people tune in for this. Odd Dark is here. Esmeralda, right? Data manipulation for billionaire busy work. Yeah, that's the payroll number. Or that's the Saylor story, or both. If Warsh increases rates, stocks will unwind lower a bit, and Bitcoin will naturally unwind lower towards 55K. Then Saylor may panic and push BTC towards 49K, and BlackRock scoops it up lower. Yeah. Well, obviously, dude, if Warsh actually does hike rates, Bitcoin's going a lot lower than 55K because I think that's just crazy banana pants, especially with what's going on with this labor market and the inflation related to the Strait of Hormuz and crude oil problem. Because it's not just crude oil, right? It's all the petrochemicals that came out of all these, you know, Gulf facilities, fertilizer. I mean, you know, we have to assume that that's going to end at some point. You know, some people say it has, some people say it hasn't. You know, you have to assume it's going to end at some point, and the longer it goes on, the worse the temporary inflation will be and perhaps could become permanent. But a Fed interest rate hike is not going to stop any of that. It's not going to stop what's going on in the Strait, and it's not going to stop the hyperscalers from indiscriminately spending on data centers. It's not going to stop. They're going to borrow money at any price because they know if they lose, they're done. That's it. So, yeah. But, yeah, if Warsh does actually go up, at Predator says, ride it to the bottom. You know, that's kind of Toby's attitude. It's like if they want to take it lower, it won't stay down. It'll go down, but it won't stay down. And if it does go down, either be on a policy error, which would be Warsh, or, you know, the fact that Saylor won't let the story die. Sometimes it's almost like it's like weird PR. It's not unsensible. It just shows a lack of understanding about how Wall Street works, because when the story was over, they were going to take this thing up to 70. Now it's going to require somebody to go, well, you know, and they have to rationalize it, which sounds terrible. Well, it's only a little sale. Yeah, okay. But, you know, they have to do a lot of little sales to cover this dividend, and they're hyper levered. So on one hand, it really isn't a big deal. On the other hand, you hand the short something, and we will see who wins, and we will always keep track of the charts, and we will do our roadmaps and our Patreon reports, and you should stay tuned for all of that. In the meantime, that is the market update. I will see you soon.